I'm Charles, and that is my smug mug there. And if you have any questions after the webinar today, or just want to reach out and tell me how awesome I am, this is my Twitter handle and my email address. So if you like, feel free to email me any questions or tips and comments on today's webinar. This is just the second time that I've given this particular boot camp. This morning was the first time and ran a little bit long, and hopefully we're fixing the polishing the rough edges as we go along. So please feel free to share any comments that you might have or any errors and typos that you find in the lab manual. So I'm the head Mac nerd here at Enable. I have been working with Macs for probably almost 30 years and have been fixing and managing and automating them for probably 20 of those years. And so that's why I'm presenting today. So let's get to know you. And for that, I have some questions for you to answer. First off, what is your level of experience with shell scripting? And that's on any platform, Mac, Linux. If you do scripting on anything with a command line, are you new to the scripting scene? Do you write your own, or are you actually an artificial intelligence that is made up of bash scripts? Looks like just about everyone has weighed in, and the results are fairly mixed. We do have some experienced scripting attendees today, and then at least a few that have no experience in shell scripting as of yet. For my next question, what is your level of experience with managing Macs, Apple hardware in general? Are you getting started? Have you done it for a while? Or are you like me and you have floppy disks with installers for System 7 still on? So it looks like there's a mix, once again, of folks getting started and those with more experience. And if you still have your floppy disks from the 80s, I would like to talk to you after. Last poll for the beginning part of the session. How many Macs are you managing right now? So do you have a big group of Macs that you're doing management for, or are you just getting started and you have you're starting to build that as part of your repertoire? Or do you have a nice steady stable of 50 or 100 in your fleet? Again, another mix of fleet size here. We do have a nice median range of 10 to 50 people, or 10 to 50 Macs. More than half of you are in that range, and nobody's got more than 100 yet, so that's quite all right. My job to help bring that number up, part of my Mac nerd job description. So now that we know each other a little bit better, today's agenda. Today we're going to talk about scripting on the Mac and how to save yourself some time in your daily admin tasks, those sorts of things that you do every day, leading up to and including things like automating configurations and software installations. We'll start with a little bit of history and background and talk about what your options are for scripting languages to learn if you're still learning, and some hands-on in writing shell scripts. And I'll go back and forth between referring to them as shell scripts and bash scripts. In my mind, they're equivalent, but the pedantic among you will say that, well, you can run a shell script in bash or in ZSH or CSH or SH, or any number of shell environments, and they are just a little bit different between the different shells. But in my mind, the name bash script just has stuck. So, and then we can get into making some of those scripts actually work for you on your managed Macs, customizing them for your environment. Eventually, we will build on that to change configurations, install apps on all the Macs in your fleet, and build up automations. So first, the history lesson, and I'm going to swing through this pretty quickly. If you have more questions than I have answers, at least in this section, there's plenty of resources online not the least of which is Wikipedia for things like what you can find circa 1992 AppleScript, for instance. And so initially, the Mac didn't have a command line like so-called serious computers like DOS machines and mainframes that ran Unix. And Apple eventually developed its own scripting language to make up for that. It's been around for about 30 years now and gone through considerable evolution, including the pivot to being an open architecture. So at least open by Apple's definition anyway. So you can see components sometimes referred to as OSA, or Open Scripting Architecture, or OSAX, or their OSA extensions. And AppleScript has one main advantage, and that is, especially back when the only other way to program on Macs was in something like CodeWarrior, or you're doing things in C or Pascal. AppleScript is human readable, and it's not as obfuscated as doing things in a big batch file of DOS commands. It's more like a natural language. So if you read it aloud, it's almost like something that you would say to Siri or Alexa. This is an actual working script. Tell application Microsoft Word to create new document. And if I were to run this, Microsoft Word would pop up, create a new document, and put the cursor on line 1 ready for you to start typing. On the plus side, having hooks into the OS, being a first-party solution, you can even write full-fledged applications in AppleScript. The standard GUI library is there, things like buttons and list items, that sort of thing. You can link in Objective-C for doing more in-depth real programming, so to speak. You can create your components in the same tool chain that you would for your iOS apps or your modern OS X apps, which is Xcode. The downside of being human readable and flexible is that the language is very slow. The resources of your blazing fast Mac can be ground to a halt by a couple of inefficient AppleScript calls. Things that are waiting for input or just looping over really long lists can slow things down considerably. But if you're interested in more of the history and the fiddly details of AppleScript, I highly recommend the site macOS Automation, written by Sal Soghoian. He's the head of all things automation at Apple for 25 years or so, and just left Apple a few years ago because they essentially eliminated the department that he was the head of for 2.5 decades. So go figure. And if you are really interested in Apple scripting as far as development goes, there's Xcode, which is the first-party solution made by Apple. It's the same toolchain that you would use to develop Mac and iOS apps. It's really fully featured as far as building everything up from icons to the command line and everything in between. But it's kind of a big hammer for a small nail if you're using AppleScript to build automations. There is the script editor and automator, which are also both made by Apple. Script editor is more of a text editor that's made for AppleScript. It doesn't have great documentation for it. Automator is drag and drop, and you can record actions that you're doing over and over again as a script or as an application that you can just double click on, and whatever you did when you were recording, it happens again on the playback. There is a sort of best-in-class third-party solution called Script Debugger, and that is it's sort of like your VS Code specifically for AppleScript. There's a light version that's free, and then there's the full version from latenightsw.com is $99. And again, if you're really into AppleScript and you're doing really big workflows, that's probably the way to go, unless you're trying to integrate it in with Xcode. Then along came OS X, and it is OS X, not OS X, and Apple's even dropped the Roman numeral 10, so now it is just macOS. But when it first came out, OS X, oh hey, it's Unix. So we're going to do an overview of scripting today, and so the best way to get started for that is to learn Bash, or the shell, the command line. If you can run commands and get the results that you want, you can package up those commands into a file, and run them anytime you like. So with OS 10, the Mac really had a command line, and as such, gets all the goodies that comes with it. OS 10 built on top of BSD, so Unix called Darwin, and that heritage still shows if you scratch the surface a little bit. If you're familiar with Linux, many of the tools and commands will generally be interchangeable, but Linux is not Unix, so don't assume everything will work 100% the same. Even the same shell environment between the two, the commands will be the same, but the syntax might be different, or the output might be all in one line instead of broken up into multiple lines, that sort of thing. So whenever you're grabbing a script from an external source, something like GitHub or a book on Linux, that sort of thing, you're going to have to make sure that you double check everything for the syntax being input and output. Sorry, compatible inputs and outputs. OS 10 comes with a number of shells built in. The default shell these days is ZSH or ZSH, as some of my European friends reminded me, but Bash is still there all the way back to the original shell for backward compatibility. And this article from scriptingos10.com is really in-depth, and it keeps updating it for what sorts of things you will need to know if you want to move older scripts that are written for Bash to ZSH. Bash isn't gone, not by any stretch, at least not yet, because there's so much under the hood in BSD or in Darwin that refers to Bash or has specifically pieces that will break in ZSH or something other than Bash. And until Apple pulls all those pieces out, they're not going to be getting rid of Bash yet. But again, so for backward compatibility, this is going to be your friend. Go with the old school SH, which is your sort of least common denominator for writing shell scripts. And if you're going to be writing those scripts, it's a text file. Basically, ASCII text is pretty much what you'll stick to. So any text editor will do. I don't want to take sides in the perpetual war between Vi or VI and Emacs. I don't even want to commit to how to pronounce it. So no comments except to say all of those command line editors are pre-installed, and I use Nano, so don't fight me. TextEdit, which is also pre-installed, is fine. It's a free text editor. Just beware that it does have a tendency to make RTF files, which are rich text formatting, with the formatting built in. And if you go to create a script in TextEdit and it comes out as an RTF file, you might end up with a bunch of garbage on the command line instead of just plain ASCII text. So keep that in mind. Xcode, which you can download from Apple's developer site, again, is overkill unless you're building something in a serious automation project or you're trying to integrate it in with something like Objective-C or working with a bunch of libraries that are scattered all over the place. Finally, there's a huge number of third-party text editors that exist. Any of them will suffice. A lot of Windows admins will already know VS Code from Microsoft. Web developers might know Atom for GitHub integration. Personally, I prefer BBEdit, which is partly out of habit and familiarity. It's been around for 25 years, and I've been using some version of it for most of that time. It's like the Emacs for GUI editors in that it has grown organically, added so much functionality to the point it's almost an operating system in its own. And really, what other text editor do you know of that has its own merchandise? So you can get t-shirts and stickers and hats and things. You can buy it from barebones.com or use the free version as long as you like. And like with some of the other freemium stuff like Script Debugger, you'll only miss out on those edge case features that are more advanced functionality anyway. So you know what, let's do that now. So we'll take 10 minutes to go and download BBEdit and install it on your Mac. And no need to purchase it, just install the free version. It will give you 30 days to try out all the features. And then after that, you can use the free version indefinitely and still have like 90–95% of those functions. In the last session, someone asked how to get this sidebar with your documents in it, and it just opens up. I think it just opens up automatically once you open up multiple files. But if you don't have it open, you'll just see a window like this. But since I'm always working on multiple things at once, I like to have the sidebar there, and I can see quickly jump from one script to another. A .sh file here. I'm going to bump up the font size so we can see a little bit better. So I have a shell script here with the extension .sh, and when I start a script using a little special phrase here called the shebang, and this is the £sign and the exclamation mark followed by the path to the shell that this script will actually run in. In this case, it's going to be running in sh. So it's a again, it's a fairly rudimentary script. This one is, and it's a sort of that least common denominator. And you can see example here is a comment. So everything that begins with that £sign or octothorpe is a comment, and it's just a matter of typing in whatever you like in there, and the shell will just skip over it. These blue items, make directory and MV, they are commands that will run, and then the rest is, these are just strings that are in white. So all the context clues are there, so you can see if you make a mistake, that's no longer a valid command, and so it's switched it from blue to white, for instance. And this should be fairly familiar to you if you've used an IDE or programming text editor before. So what is this doing? What is this actual script doing? Well, I will show you something that I end up doing a lot in there we go. Something I end up doing a lot in, for instance, the Finder or whatever you're using for file management. You end up with big long lists of files, and some of them are, so these are text files, these are shell scripts, these are a bunch of screenshots that are in PNGs, and then there's this pixelmator that's a PXD, and so on. And we can sort them by name and date modified and what kind they are in the columns in the Finder. But if I wanted to organize this as a, say this was all the files that are on my desktop, and I wanted to organize them so that I can see what's there more at a glance, as opposed to seeing, all of this kind of mixed up in the same folder. So what I could do is, I could create a new folder for PNGs, and then go in and select the PNGs that I want and move them into this folder, and then do the same thing with text files. And then, so I've got all these different, kinds of files and extensions. So what I'd end up with is a folder with a bunch of folders in it that have, at least it's broken down into the kind of files that I was working with. Just as a means of organizing things, that's not too bad. A lot of times what I would do is I would do a shortcut to doing all of that dragging and dropping. I would open up the terminal and do it in a terminal with, so what I'm going to do is, let's say I'll change directories to this temp folder here. And then if I list the files, yeah, there they are. So instead of dragging and, selecting and dragging and dropping, what I could do is make a directory called PNG, and then move all of the PNG extensions to the PNG folder, and there they are. So now they're all in They're all in here. Great. And then I can just do that again with JPEGs and text files and so on. So that might be a little bit faster, especially if you've got a few thousand files all in the same place or in the same directory structure. If you want to do moving things around that way, the command line is a lot faster than dragging and dropping and selecting and making sure that you have all the right things selected. And if you can do it on the command line, you can also do it as a shell script. So what this is doing is it's like a batch file in DOS. So it just has a list of commands that you would do on the command line as if you were sitting down and typing them. So I'm making a directory for PNGs, and then I'm moving all the PNGs to that folder. And then I'm doing it again because everything is case sensitive. And so some of those PNG files would have lowercase extension, some would have an uppercase extension. And then I'm doing it again with JPEGs, and some of them are JPEG, some of them are uppercase, and then with TIFF and so on. I could just keep going on and on and on with every different kind of different extension that I wanted to manage. And this is a valid way to do those sort of checklist items, things that you would normally have to run. Again, sitting at the keyboard and putting in the command to move your backups into archive or what have you. It is a little tedious, and it will break if you need to add another kind of file into your list of files. So this is where a lot of people start when it comes to automation. I'm doing these things instead of doing them by hand. I'm doing them on the command line. And if I'm doing them on the command line, I'm just going to put all those commands into a script, save it, and then run that script. But if you get a little bit of logic into your script, then it will be much more applicable to other environments when the directory changes, or if your needs change as far as, well, I don't need to do just image files, suddenly I need to do all the different Word files and things like that. So in this case, what we have is a for loop. So for each of the files in this file listing of star.star, do the stuff that's in here. And I'll say, I'll go ahead and say this is not going to be a Bash 101 kind of class for learning Bash scripts if you've never done them before. For that, there's a lot of better resources out there that can teach you the basics of Bash all the way up to writing all kinds of complicated stuff. I don't have anything open right now that's very impressive. These are pretty straightforward examples, and I can show you how at least to read some of the things that are going on here and what kinds of things you can do in Bash as examples, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, for instance, variable expansion and replacement here. So in this case, so I have this list of files, and I'm going to take the file name, and what this is doing is taking the extension from that file name, which is the leftovers of removing everything before the first, before the last dot. So the $sign is used for expansion and text replacement within the command line. So what this is telling it is the last dot in the file name, everything after that is the extension. And the variable name here is ext. So if a directory with that extension name does not already exist, I'm going to create it. So I'm going to do make mkdir with, if the extension is PNG, it's going to make a directory called PNG, but only if that does not exist. So the exclamation mark or bang here is a not. This is testing to see if a directory, which is the D, exists with that name. So if that does not yet exist, I'm going to create it. And then if it does exist, then it skips this whole step and then just moves the file name into that folder. And in this case, the file name is surrounded by quotes because sometimes files have spaces in them and other weird characters. And rather than having to do all the special cases for escaping slashes and quotation marks and things like that, and spaces, just put it all in quotes and Bob's your uncle. So with this as my example, if I go back to the terminal here, I have that shell script. I think it's saved as, to demo. Okay. To run that on the command line, I sh. So that's invoking the shell itself and the file name. And so that will run. I'll do its thing. And if I look back over here in the Finder, look, there's a PNG folder with all my PNGs in it. There's a PXD folder with my Pixelmator, shell scripts, TIFFs, and text files. So just as a quick example of what you can do from dragging and dropping to typing in the commands to scripting those commands, you've got just a quick overview of the kinds of things that I generally automate. And these are the sorts of things that I do every day because I've got, like I said, a bunch of files in a folder, or I've got a bunch of URLs and I need to go grab the, the content of the URL, or I need to remove the, remove the weird characters at the end of names and stuff like that. And these kinds of scripts are the kinds of things that you'll do literally probably every day if you start doing bash automation as part of your regular job. Because people will come to you and say, this thing is going to take me 10 hours to do, can you help me? And you'll boil it down to something that'll take literally just a few minutes. And so that, as I said, was an example of bash or shell scripting. So the rest of the bootcamp will be talking about shell scripting, but there is a veritable plethora of other options, either already built in under the hood as provided by Apple or available to install from third parties, open source repositories, that sort of thing. Swift is Apple's newest programming language. We use it for building Mac and iOS apps. And it also has a command line interface that can make your Mac jump through some pretty impressive hoops. There's also Objective-C, which is still lurking under the hood, left over from the Next Step days. That has hooks for AppleScript, so you can do you can build your user interface in AppleScript and have it run Objective-C objects. There's a whole bunch of third-party scripting languages, including Python and Go and Ruby and PowerShell. And yes, I said PowerShell. The bad news is with any of these third-party scripting languages, the dependencies may not be installed by default. So if something requires a particular Python library or Perl or something to do text manipulation, you may have to build those yourself or put them in some kind of installer so that the machines that you want to run your Python scripts on have the necessary requirements for that. Python especially because there's the division between Python 2 and Python 3, and you can do multiple versions of each one, but it does have the advantage of having its own virtual environments set up, mostly to solve its own problems. But yes, I did say PowerShell, and to do that, most Macs are not going to have PowerShell on them as a default, but we can install it in a few different ways. Some of you may be familiar with the product called Chocolatey, which is a repository of installers for a few thousand different objects that works on Windows, and you can automate the installation of and updating of all these different things from vendors all over the place, and do it all through what one command line called choco.exe. Well, on the Mac and Linux and maybe on Windows as well, there is a similar tool called Homebrew, and the command for that is brew. And to install that, I've already installed it on this machine, so I'll skip this step. But the command in your lab manual is a simple one-line shell script. And what it does is uses curl, which is downloads data from a URL, and it is putting this file from this URL, this install.sh, onto your computer, and then it is running it with bash. So when you run this, it will ask for sudo access, which is going to require your admin password. Like I said, I will skip this. And when that runs, you'll see it go through and download files and install things into various places in your file system, and give you, among other things, a way to install PowerShell. And so with a command like install PowerShell, it will go out and find the installer for you and update it and grab the dependencies, if there are any that need to be installed or updated, do all of the necessary bits of permissions and creating files and folders. And when you're done, you will have access to the PowerShell environment. So this is now running PowerShell on my Mac. And so that might make you a little giddy, because suddenly you have access to all the PowerShell stuff that you have written on your Windows devices. And within the Automation Manager, though it does not have the ability to run AMP files, if you have the PS1 files from PowerShell or anywhere else on the web, Microsoft examples, GitHub, that sort of thing, now you can integrate those in with your Macs, so long as they have PowerShell installed. Now, a lot of the things like environment variables, anything that deals with the registry, or anything that deals with specific hardware like disk encryption, that sort of stuff, that's not going to work. But if you wanted to, for instance, so let's do get, and then it does have tab completion. We can do something like get processes, and that's a list of all the running processes. So this PowerShell script is going to do get process. Let's bump that text up. There we go. So this is again in BB edit. It's going to do get process, and then pipe that output to the sort object. And it's going to sort that data by the CPU column, descending, and then it is going to pipe that again to the select object command, and then that is going to grab the first 5 top CPU using processes. And when I'm writing this as a PS1 file to run on my Mac, in the same way that I would write shebang bin sh, the PowerShell executable here is pwsh, and it's in this path right here. And I know that because in my terminal, so I exit here, what I can do is which pwsh, and it will tell me the path to that executable that I'm looking for. So if I take this file here and run it as if it were a shell script, so the same way I did the other bash scripts, I'm just going to use sh, which tells the shell to open it. It should run. Sorry. I do pwsh and then that file. Now I'll get the output from the PowerShell. And these are my top 5 CPU using processes right now. And surprise, surprise, go to meeting in Google Chrome or right at the top. And so that is the output from that PowerShell script. And any number of scripts that you already have written or have in your arsenal will work very similarly on the Mac. Anything that you do, however, is going to be Mac specific, and it's going to be using things like Unix style paths with forward slashes instead of backslashes, that sort of thing. So you can use PowerShell on the Mac with an asterisk. And so now it's your turn. Go ahead and use the lab manual to install Brew. And then once Brew is installed, use that to install PowerShell. And if you've got some time left over, go ahead and open up a PowerShell session and play around. See what you can come up with as far as useful commands that you may already be familiar with from working in PowerShell. That is assuming that you have any experience in PowerShell up to this point. Anyhow, so the next step in our evolution here is to take one of the scripts that we write and deploy it and run our script on the remote Mac with nCentral. And to do that, I will need to log into nCentral first. So give me just a moment to log in and do my 2-factor authentication. And I'll move that over here. So for my demonstration purposes, I have set up a company called Charles's Break Fix Emporium, and I have currently one workstation that is a Mac running here, the M1 Mac Mini, and it is running macOS 11.6. I don't know why it's got a little penguin icon there instead of the happy apple, but that's another one of those things that hopefully will be addressed in short order with the Mac agent and updates to nCentral in the next few releases. I know there's a lot on the roadmap, things coming out this month and throughout the end of the year and well in through 2022 that are going to be expanding the features and functionality of nCentral as far as doing things like Apple device enrollment and that sort of thing. But for right now, if I want to run a Mac script, I'm going to grab it from my computer. And in this case, it is going to be this installer.sh. And I'm just going to call installer. And what this does is actually blocks the installation of Monterey, which is the latest version of macOS, which came out just a few weeks ago and is still, in my opinion, still not quite ready for prime time. There's a lot of things that are broken as far as vendors third-party solutions are concerned. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to run it on my. Do it now. Give it an hour, and I only want it to do its thing. And then I'm going to get notifications to myself when it runs, and save that. So what is this script that I'm sending to my Mac Mini? So this is a really simple script that is, all it's doing is downloading, again with that tool called curl. It is downloading this installer package from GitHub and putting it in this folder, this temp folder, and naming it MontereyBlocker.pkg. And just for reference, what this Monterey Blocker does is it runs on Macs that are running Big Sur, and if the user opens the Monterey installer application, this Monterey Blocker script that's running as a launch agent, I believe. It's a launch daemon, basically sitting in the background and waiting for triggers. The Monterey Blocker will basically kill the process that is installing Monterey, so you can prevent your users from actually going in and double clicking on the installer from Apple, because Apple will very happily send them notification that says, hey, Monterey is available, why don't you install it now? So what this script itself does is downloads that package, and a little bit of logic here for error checking. So if whatever this is true, then it runs the installer. And if not, it just ends. So what here in between the brackets is looking for the exit code from the previous command. So the previous command being curl here. If the previous command has any output, it would go to it would just go to the terminal or the standard output or into the log files or what have you. And when it exits, it will exit with a code that usually is not a visible thing. It's just something that is sort of under the hood. And to retrieve that exit code, we use $, which again is for variable expansion, and then question mark, which gives us the specifically the error or the exit code. And if that exit code is 0, and that means there were no errors, then that completed successfully. And that means we can run this this application called installer, and installer takes 2 arguments of the package to install, which is this guy here that we just downloaded, and the target, which is the root of the file system, and that is just represented as a /. So going here to terminal, for instance, any command you run, let's do list of the directories there. If you get the exit code, which is that $question mark, in this case, the ls exited with code of 0, which means no errors, 0 errors. If I type in something that doesn't exist, command not found, and I do the same thing, that error code is something that I can act on in my own scripts. So my command wasn't found, get an error 127, or really anything non-0, then I can stop my script or branch at that point and say, from here, I had an error and now I need to correct it. And so that's just a really simple example of the error checking. So if curl gets a 404 error if this file is moved, if my network connection is broken or what have you. I won't get a 0, and so the installer won't run. It'll just exit the script. And if I wanted to report that as an error, I would do something like else, and then I would do exit, and so that makes it exit, and then I can give it a non-zero number here. I'll exit with 1111, and so I can look for that on my and whatever is calling this script. Say, okay, so this exit code gives me something that I can trigger on, or I can get my reporting to look for errors that of that nature that exited with this kind of thing. So to go back to my Mac, I should be able to see. I go back to my workstations here, the Mac Mini. I go into monitoring, and actually I'll skip this for right now, but yeah, what I could do is check it as a task to run that script, and once that's done, I could do the reporting, but all this is doing is would be reporting that it actually ran. There was no real output for that task. And so go back to reporting and deploying. Okay, so so that was just a quick example of deploying that that particular script, which was used for downloading and installing the Monterey blocker. But it could be any package that you want to download and install. It could be any of the other scripts that we talk about today, logging out the current user or checking to see how long the idle time is, that sort of thing. So fairly straightforward. And if you're using N-central for managing Macs, that's going to be most of what you do with regards to automation. Is going to be running a Mac script. And there are multiple languages supported. So you can send it shell scripts. You could send it those PS1 scripts. Python, presuming that you have Python installed on those machines, that sort of thing. And a good place to look for those would be in our automation cookbook at success.enable.com/cookbooks. There's more and more of those every day, and part of my job as the Mac nerd is to add more Mac relevant items to the cookbooks. And my manager reminded me that I am a little behind, but I have plenty of them. I've got a bunch that are waiting to be uploaded and verified. So once you have a script like that, you can work out customizing it, adding your own variables and parameters to it. So the world is your oyster, presuming that you have the right knife to open it with. I've lost track of that metaphor. Anyway, so I have, oh, we already did that demo. So now your job is to use the another package manager, much like Brew. This one is called Installator, and it is built mostly on Bash as far as the way that it's run and the way that it's built, and it's 100% scriptable, and it's sort of an alternative to having a managed patch system that is using something like Monkey on the back end, or Reposado, or however you pronounce that, for its downloads. Installator is another community managed and mostly open source as far as the actual creation of it, but you can use it to do things like upload or update Microsoft Office. You can use it to grab and install the latest versions of your web browsers and that sort of thing. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to run that. So just follow along in the lab manual on where you need to go to get the installer itself. And then the example I give you in the lab manual is to install Brave, which is a web browser that's primarily focused on privacy and security. But if you've already installed Brave, there's plenty of other things in the installer list, what it supports. So yeah, you can even get the latest version of 1Password. I don't remember seeing that before. Updated versions of Atom. You can update BBEdit. You can use it for uploading or updating Dropbox, Discord, a whole number of things that you would normally have to go and get from their respective websites. But Installer, again, much like Brew and Chocolatey, has a way of getting those automatically, and the command line for that is just like Brew is. It's a matter of Installer and install. So the RMM patch management is, like I said, it's much more robust and has a lot more to it than the Installer scripting in the background. So this is just a workaround, pretty much. So the next thing that I would like to show you is text size up here, and oh, that's on the wrong screen. So let's put that here, and here we go. Okay, so scripting alone is great, but it's not automation. While it can be a time saver, if there's still a person, usually you, that still has to run the events or trigger the events, you're still driving with your hand still on the wheel, but maybe you're using cruise control. As for me, I would much rather relax and let the car drive itself, especially along the boring stretches of the highway, and just wake me up when it gets interesting. So with your automation running happily along in the background, waiting to do your bidding, you can run things like maintenance scripts on certain schedules. You can, right now, just as is, you can do reporting. You can see when things are, drives are getting full or machines are offline, that sort of thing. You can use a script to check on things that maybe are not as accessible in the dashboard, or if you have a particular piece of information that that you can get from the command line or from a certain application that's built in, you write a script and it will report on it as with any other script check or things like that. But if it's something that you can anticipate as an error anyway, why not just go ahead and build that into your script to be smart enough to take that branch on an error and run a command that fixes the problem for you. So the machine fixes itself, makes a note of it in the logs, and then you get to take credit for it. So in this instance, this is a question for admins that are, maybe you're working on a site that has physical security where everyone's going to be logged out and out of the building by 6 p.m. and you can tell from policy standpoint that nobody should be logged into the machines that are on site. They should all be logged out, and so you can run something like this at, say, 7 p.m. give everyone time to get out of the building and log out and make their way out of the building. So in this case, what we're doing is getting the name of the active logged in user. So if there's somebody sitting at the machine logged in, you can find that with on the Mac, as with all Unix-like systems, everything is a file in the file system. So if we look at this device file in dev console, we can see that it is it was created on November the 8th, so that's the last time that I logged in. I probably need to reboot at some point. It's owned by me, and my main group ID is staff. So this set of information about the about this file, which is sort of a virtual file, can tell me that this user that's in this group has been logged into the machine since this date, which is handy, which means we can also script it and see if so stat is a way of getting status for files and directories, things like when it was created, whether it's readable, writable, that sort of thing. And what we're going to do is see if if dev console exists and is owned by a user, it will be returned in this variable, logged in user. So with that, we can use what's called directory services DSCL and read the group called admin. On most Unixes, this will be wheel. I don't really know where that comes from, but somebody knows where the term wheel comes from with regards to the admin group on Unix. Please let me know. It's a historical note. Anyhow, so we're using the directory services app here to read the database that refers to the admin group, and then taking that output and piping the output into grep, which is another one of those fun words that I have no idea where it came from, but it is a regular expression search for this term, group membership. So if I go to shell here, do DSCL. Oh, I can do it in interactive mode, but that's not what I want. What I want to do is open up the default database, which is going to be at dot, and read. So this is my output from directory services of the group called admin, and it has the UID, the members, the UIDs of the various members of the group. For some reason, dozens of versions of myself are in the group, perhaps because different processes have added me to the admin group over time, things like the group ID and so on. And what I really want to do is look for this line that says group membership, because that line there is the list of members in the group, because I'm not interested in their UIDs and I'm not interested in the group IDs and all that kind of stuff. So if I take that output and with the pipe, I'll take the output and put it into the grep command. And what I can do is, let's say I want to grep for the term real. And so this line, real name administrators, comes back because that's the only line in this output that contains the word real. And so If instead I do a search for group membership, I should get this line back. Yes, so it gives me the, this is one line, but it's wrapped a bunch of times. The group membership line, which is the list separated by spaces of the admins in that group. And so this next line here is taking the output of that. So the one line that gets returned from grep, it outputs it. Since this is a variable, it has a $sign, outputs that variable and goes into another grep. And fgrep is a functional grep. It's basically the same search, just with certain features turned on. And what it's looking for is my name, the logged in user. And if that comes back with true, so then the logged in user is a member of the admin group. So what I can do is say, okay, the logged in user is an admin, so we're going to leave them alone. So it must be someone from IT running updates or doing maintenance on that machine. But if the logged in user is not an admin, so if this statement comes back false, I'm going to put the logged in user is not an admin out to the logs. And then what we can do is actually force the user to log out. And whereas if it was an admin user, we would quietly exit with no errors. On this line, we are exiting with basically a non-zero, which means it will come up as an error when the script ran. And if you do want to force the current user to log out, I should probably not play around with this because it will log me out in the middle of doing my session. The command that you want to do that with is launch control. And launch control has all of these different actions that it can do. For instance, it can boot out, removes the service from the domain. So what it'll do is actually boot out, and you give it the service name for the console that the person's logged into, and it will kick them out. You can also force it to reboot, and that will just immediately reboot the machine. Again, you don't want to do this when there's somebody who's logged in that is actually doing stuff, but again, there's a variety of things that you can do to remotely remove someone that is logged into the machine, whereas you are not. So yeah, so here's the format for the user. So the user itself would be this logged in user, and it would be something along the lines of launch control, boot out, and then that user. But I'm not going to do that because I don't want to tempt fate by running that and kicking myself out in the middle of doing a boot camp. So as an example of something that you can do with sort of ifs and thens, or ifs and elses, if you get an error or get a true false statement, and you can say, well, this person's an admin, I'm going to leave them alone, or this person's not allowed to be in the office after hours, I can boot them out, and then recording the error, the exit code when you're done. Which brings us to the next part of automation, which is configuration. So there's a lot to dig into as far as the actions that your scripts can take, things like automatically repairing and mitigations for errors that come up that you can anticipate. Much of what you're likely going to end up doing, at least when it comes to new customers and onboarding, is making configuration changes. So there's a variety of ways that you can make those changes. And just about anything you can do within the system preferences. Or the preferences for various applications like the Finder, or really any application. If you can do it in the preferences by checking a box or filling in a list or what have you, you can probably do it with command line as well. So that means you can connect to a machine remotely through the terminal, or send it a script to do to run your commands, make your changes, test the results, and you don't even have to kick the user off of their machine for 5 minutes while you go in and tweak the network settings and reconnect them to change the proxy settings or what have you. They can continue working. You send your script to run in the background, and those preferences get changed without you having to open up the preferences panel. Now, the preferred and proper process for preparing a permanent and persistent preference is with profiles, and that is something that is going to come up more and more as we add functionality to N-central with things like Apple Business Manager pushing out profiles. These kinds of configuration changes are mostly going to be for one-off or for testing, and generally can be reversed by someone going in and checking the box again. With profiles, once you can deploy profiles, those changes can be made permanent or at least more difficult to change. But for right now, for these sorts of temporary changes, I'll show you how you can do that. So a preference like the Finder preferences for showing certain items on the desktop exists in a plist file or property list. Property list files are just XML files. They have key and value pairs generally like an XML file would. The schema itself is fairly obtuse, and a lot of those files themselves end up being compressed or encrypted in some way or just obfuscated. So your best friend in managing them is an application called plist buddy. And I won't go into that right now, but I will show you how to do things called defaults. And the way to do that is with the defaults command, which is just defaults. And what I can do is just defaults read, and it will show me basically the preferences files that are loaded when I log into this computer. So there's lots and lots and lots of XML here that gets parsed through to determine what I have in my preferences. So one of the things that you can see, let's see here, I'll just make that so you can actually read the script. Defaults has dictionaries that are based on sort of the reverse DNS sort of nomenclature. So defaults domains will show you things like com.apple. And then a variety of things, or com.logmein. So it's like the reverse domain name namespace. And so if I do that same command and then pipe that output to sed, which is the string editor, and what I'm going to do is search for comma space or comma, and then I'm going to replace comma with new line, And I'll do that as a global. I think, yeah, I need to do escape the backslash here. So what that is doing is looking for every comma and then replacing it with the new line character, which is represented by the \n. And now I have a nice pretty list with, instead of commas between everything, a return a new line between everything. So just a quick little Easter egg there for you. The other thing that comes in handy for, especially for onboarding when you're doing that, that initial setup, is system setup. So you're setting up the system. Apple can be creative about their naming sometimes, but not always. And this needs to be run as an admin, which if you're sending your scripts over via N-central, you can check that box to run as admin instead of run as the logged in user. But in this case, you'll get things like getting and setting the date and time, whether or not the machine is allowed to go to sleep and how often, whether or not you can log in to the machine remotely, a variety of things that are related to the hardware control and security for physical security for the system itself. And so these commands can be so these things can be set up on the command line, and as I showed before, anything you can do on the command line you can script. And so let's take a look at the Finder preferences. And so my Finder preferences right now, capital F, there we go. Okay, so my Finder preferences right now are in this blob of XML, and what that means is that when I show the desktop, it will not show my hard drive or external drives on the desktop. So if I turn that on, when I go to the desktop, you will now see Macintosh hard drive there. If I go back and uncheck it, it has disappeared. So what I can do is find the right line for my Finder preferences here, which is, there we go. That. So com.apple.finder is the domain that I am writing the show external hard drives on desktop key, and I'm setting the value to true. So now, go back. Oh, where'd my icon go? Well, thing is, a lot of times, if you are making a change to an application's preferences, it needs some way to be told to reread those preferences when they've changed. So in this case, what I'm doing is restarting the Finder by basically killing it, and it will automatically relaunch. And oh, that's external hard drives. That's not what I want. I want show hard drives on desktop, not external hard drives. Yeah, that's what I want. And this sort of thing, looking for what the key is, that would be great if there were a way to look that up that Apple provided. Trouble is that there's so many of them that, and they're changing all the time, and they're from, available from third parties and, arbitrary names and such. You have to look them up and and basically find a good source for the the application that you're making preference changes to. Some of them are well documented, some of them are kind of secret and harder to find. But so what I'm doing now is showing the hard drives on the desktop, setting that to true, and then I'm going to kill the Finder again. And if I go back to show the Finder, now I've got the icon on the desktop again. So kind of a silly example, but if you have a way that you want to show or a way that you want to present to users specific preferences for Microsoft applications, or for Chrome, or for the Finder, things like that. You can find the keys that you want to change and set their values and put a whole bunch of defaults commands together into a script, and then upload that script as part of your initial setup and onboarding, and it will preset those preferences and configurations for you before the user even gets gets logged in for the first time. Okay, just sending a quick note to the engineering folks that I have spoken with in the past about that N-Central agent issue. I just wanted to see if they had a quick update for when that was going to be deployed. Obviously, forward-looking statements, I cannot predict the future, et cetera, et cetera. So before we close things out, we'll have one more question for you. And that is, okay. Would you be interested in joining a Mac-focused partner advisory group, or PAG? The partner advisory groups are they get together periodically. I think it's probably about once a quarter, sometimes in person if there's a big event that we're attending. And there's updates from the engineers as far as what's coming out in the roadmap, new features and things to discuss, open discussion, Q&A, that sort of thing. That's a good place to raise things like feature requests or bug fixes, that sort of thing. If you have a desire to join the a Mac-focused advisory group, please let me know, respond yes, and I will send you an invitation when the PAG launches. And if not, just click on no, and you won't hear from me ever again. No, I'm kidding. So I'll give you guys another second to, Joshua is asking, is there a way to lock the preferences that you change? There is, but there's nothing preventing the user from unlocking them, especially if they're an admin user. If you go in and lock the plist file for the Finder, for instance, you will probably end up with, well, you won't be able to make preference changes in the Finder, but it may also cause issues with some applications that need to write to their preference files. So the better way to do that, better way to handle that is to install a profile. But you are, if your users are local admins, which there's 2 camps on that. If your user is a local admin, they'll be able to go in and unlock those preferences and change them themselves, depending on how savvy they are. As far as Apple Device Manager and Intune and that sort of thing, Hugh, I can't comment on that because I honestly don't know. I know that RMM is, the RMM platform is using ADM. I know that we're working on integrations with Intune for people that manage a lot of mixed environments. Microsoft does have Intune for Macs as well. As far as the actual product stuff, that will be a question for probably in that PAG if you wanted to join the partner advisor group. This page is in your lab manual as well, but it's worth screenshotting and sharing. There's lots and lots of automation scripts in the cookbook, and I'm adding more Mac related ones all the time. There's lots of documentation from Apple on things like installing configuration profiles, and the link to the profile creator that I like to use is here. If you want to join the Mac admins community on Slack, there's a link there. It is a great resource. Lots of very smart people that have lots of very deep knowledge on all things Mac, and there's a separate channel there for specifically for shell scripting called Bash, and you are welcome to join the Mac admin Slack. And there's some books on scripting and how to use the terminal and all kinds of stuff at scriptingos10.com. Great resource. I've got probably about half of that site bookmarked in Chrome and refer to it all the time. So looks like we actually ended a little bit early, which is great. With that, I will leave you and say thank you and have a great day.